And we'll go ahead and start the March Hope Advisory Board meeting. Okay. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. You should have just gotten you are being recorded. I'm still letting folks in from the lobby, so sorry if I'm distracted. And I'll go ahead and bring up some visuals to get your meeting started. Okay. So welcome to the Hope Board March meeting. For folks who are joining, please mute yourself. In Teams, they have you join the meeting unmuted, and I know that's different than Zoom and other ones, so please mute yourself. Anyone who's here for a public comment, I see some folks from our community who are not Hope Board members. If you're interested in making a public comment, type your name into the chat area and that you want to make a public comment. And then if there's anybody on the phone, I haven't checked yet, but I'll make sure there's an opportunity for anyone calling in to make a comment as well. If you do have questions during the meeting and you're not a Hope Advisory Board member, please put them in the chat. And if the board can get to those questions during the meeting, they will. But it is a working meeting, so the time for public community members to comment is during the public comment period. So here's your meeting agenda overview. After the housekeeping and the roll call and minutes in the beginning, my colleagues are here from our Coordinated Homeless Response Office to get your feedback, Hope Board members, on our draft outline for our strategic plan. So I'm excited to share that with you and hear what you have to say about it. Many of you wrote those HOPE recommendations that are going to be incorporated into this strategic plan, and many of you did not. And so your fresh eyes are going to be just as valuable as the folks who wrote them. And then I've got a community progress update for you all. And I wanted to mention too, I'll be sharing some community progress from our providers and others. And if something occurs to one of you as board members that you want to provide a progress update from Casa Latinos Unidos or Corvallis Housing First or any other perspective you bring as Hope Board members, I'm going to pause and make sure there's room for that and time for that too. If we have time, we put in the agenda an educational component about tracking Oregon state legislation. How do you track it? How do you submit testimony? There's a lot going on right now. If we don't have time for this educational component, I will email out to all the board members and make sure it's included in the meeting materials, all of the information that we're going to share there. But in case we do have time, that's here on the agenda. For folks just joining, please make sure you're muted. I can hear a couple feedback things. And a reminder to everybody on the board and folks tuning in the community, the agreements that the HOPE board members themselves wanted to make for the culture and the conduct of the HOPE Advisory Board. I continue to include this to set that tone of kindness and open-mindedness and respect and curiosity and inclusivity. Okay, I will go ahead and stop screen sharing so I can see if there is anyone interested in doing public comment. Peggy Lynch, thank you for being here. No public comment. Gotcha. Are there any folks who have called in who would like to make a public comment? Or anyone who is not able to utilize the chat function who would like to make a public comment? Okay. We'll go ahead and continue with your meeting. And I see most of the board members are here now. Fantastic. We'll do just a little bit of housekeeping and then get on with the show. Your January 2022 minutes I sent out on Friday. And you know what, before I pull up roll call here, apologies. Are there any amendments, edits, additions that any HOPE board members would like to make to your minutes from your last meeting? Okay. Then could one of you please make a motion to approve your January minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Andrea. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Bria. And I'll go ahead and do roll while you can say, yes, you are here. And whether you vote yes or no or abstain if you were not at the last H.O.P.E meeting. Peggy McGuire is excused today. She's on a well-deserved family vacation. Catherine Bisco. I know she's joining, but she might be running a little bit late. Carol Butcher. Alice Carter.
Yes.
Thank you, Alice. And were you at the January meeting? Do you vote yay or nay?
Yay.
Thank you. Ricardo?
I'm here and yes.
Thank
Vote.
you. Brian? I haven't seen Brian join yet. Hopefully he can. Cade?
Here and approve.
Anita?
Here and approve.
Joel?
Here and approved.
Ari? Ari, I know you were here. There we go.
Here and approve.
Thank you. Melissa?
Here, and I think I have to abstain. I don't think I attended the whole meeting and I did not review the minutes.
Thank you. Bria?
Here and approve.
Cindy? I saw you earlier, Cindy. Are you still here?
Here and
There we
approve
go.
with my mute button off.
That's okay. Thank you. Charles?
Here and approve.
And Peggy's excused today, Paula. Andrea?
Here and approve.
Chanel?
Here and approve.
Nancy?
Here and approve.
Great. Your minutes are passed. So I'm going to dive right into this. But first, before I do, Hope Board members, you are a crucial piece of the puzzle that we are working on right now. And we're going to be giving a lot of overview, a lot of why we are here, what we are working on, how the Hope Board recommendations are the foundation. Because there are lots of board members now who were not a part of the original process to put together the Hope recommendations. And so really for that continuity of what we're doing now has a foundation from this board. And then I would love for you to listen closely as we really get into the meat of it, because your feedback is really critical. Is it making sense? So I'm so glad that so many of you could be here tonight. And with that, we will go ahead and dive back in. So the work that I am doing with my county and city and community services consortium colleagues is now being termed the Benton County Coordinated Homeless Response Office. So we're going to continue to talk about the coordinated office work. And right now, today, we really want to talk to you all at the Hope Board about our strategic plan. So this is the community engagement on our strategic plan and whether it's making sense and if you have feedback for us. So before we dive in, I want to make sure to introduce my colleagues, April Holland and Rebecca Taylor, and I will stop screen sharing so that you can all see them. So April, please.
Hi, it's so nice to see you all today. My name is April Holland, she, her, and I know some of you from my day job, my normal job as the public health director here at Benton County. I'm really happy to support our health department as the interim health department director while a recruitment unfolds for a new leader. And I'm very excited for the work that's occurred and what's to come, both from the Hope policy recommendations and the Coordinated Homeless Response Office. So nice to see you all today. Thank you.
Thanks, April. And April can't stay for the whole meeting because she's working like 3 jobs right now. But I wanted to make sure that she could be here to introduce herself so you all know who she is and the role that she plays. And she is involved in overseeing all the work that Rebecca and I do. Rebecca, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Rebecca Taylor, she, her pronouns, the project manager to support implementing the work of the policy recommendations in our community and move this great work forward in our community.
Thanks. And for those who don't know me, my name's Julie Arena, and I use she, her pronouns. And I also work for Benton County within the health department, but collaboratively with city and county and community services consortium colleagues in this coordinated homeless response office work. And it's really a continuation of the work that I've been doing for the past 3.5 years. And now we have a bit more structure and more capacity, which is super exciting. Okay, so let's dig in. Today's goals. We really want to go over for folks who weren't at the last meeting, people who are just tuning in, and because it's been shifting in the past couple of months and really becoming a bit more firmed up, the roles and functions of these different entities involved in our coordinated homeless response and our coordinated homeless response office. So the Intergovernmental Council, we call that the IGC. The elected bodies, so city councils from Corvallis, Adair, Monroe, Philomath, Albany, and our county board of commissioners. You all with the Hope Advisory Board, your role and your function, and then coordinated response office staff. So that's folks like myself and Rebecca and April, Peggy Shop over at CSC, and Paul Bellata with community development. And then we want to take you through how the HOPE policy recommendations have laid a foundation for the work that we're doing now, and how they are informing and embedded in the strategic plan that we are putting together as part of the House Bill 4123 Coordinated Homeless Response Pilot. And so the coordinated office, myself and Rebecca and our colleagues, we have put together a draft outline of our strategic plan. And so we will end with that. What are the areas in the strategic plan? How are the HOPE policy recommendations embedded throughout? And really asking for your review of that draft plan outline and hearing your feedback. Are we making sense? Are we communicating this well? Where are the areas where we need to articulate it in a different way so that it is understandable? So Rebecca, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Julie. So just to start out getting us grounded and reminding ourselves of why we're here and how far we've come, the HOPE bylaws identified way back in 2019 that our community shared a consensus that everyone in Benton County should have the opportunity to live in decent, safe, and affordable housing. And so with that as our North Star, the policy recommendations have guided where we want to prioritize specific initiatives in our community. And so the coordinating office creates a framework both from a funding and capacity perspective to enable cross-sector operational coordination to support county-wide efforts, so all over Benton County, and then also support cities and service providers with the ultimate goal to sustain housing in every community with that North Star that everyone should have a decent place to live. So next slide. So one of the things as we talk about that framework to create that cross-sector coordination, as we were evaluating the House Bill 4123 requirements and the different components that made up the coordinated office specifically, and then identified the components in our community that support the work of the coordinated office, we wanted to make sure we prepared a illustration of this for us and the community to best communicate how each of these components serve this purpose in our community to implement those policy recommendations. So first we have the coordinated office staff at the center, as Julie said, that makes up both Julie and I reside in that office, but we also have external agencies and partners that make up that office as well. And then there's close communication between the Intergovernmental Council and the HOPE Community Engagement Board by staff supporting each of those councils and boards. And then there's a liaison component that enables expedited and streamlined communication between the work of the coordinated office and our community with the board members that make up representation on the Intergovernmental Council and the HOPE Community Engagement Board. Next slide. So just with that visual kind of giving how the relationships of each of these come together, we also want to make sure that we identified and clarified the roles of each of those components. So elected bodies, so that's our city councils and our county board of commissioners, They'll continue to drive policy decisions and provide a representation liaison to the Intergovernmental Council for that streamlined communication and coordination across different agencies. Then we have the Intergovernmental Council, again, with that one elected official from each member government serving as a liaison to their respected elected body for communications on progress of the coordinated office. Also a city manager and county administrator from member governments, also enabling that overarching leadership and coordination across governments, along with Community Service Consortium's director or their designee. And again, the purpose of this Intergovernmental Council, or IGC, is to really facilitate operational coordination and staff level collaboration. As Julie brought out, we are meeting regularly with our city counterparts to evaluate where there is a possibility for cross-jurisdictional collaboration, and then determine, again, this is a vetting environment as well, to negotiate different types of policy alignments and then determine when those policies could be elevated to the respected governments for the authority to implement in that jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So as Julie mentioned, the key component to this work is the community engagement body, which is the H.O.P.E Advisory Board, that very strong public engagement component that enables community input and a forum for feedback and involvement from cross sections of our community. Also advise elected bodies on policies. Many emerging best practices and research has been conducted within the confines of the H.O.P.E Engagement Board, or the H.O.P.E Advisory Board, which has informed the policy recommendations. So really hoping that that great work continues. Then elected officials on the H.O.P.E board serve as liaisons by communicating updates back to their elected bodies. Then the Coordinated Homeless Response Office. So really where the I guess you could say the rubber hits the pavement, and here where staff level work on policy implementation, which Julie will give an update later today about that. And then staff level coordination between county, cities, and CSC. And then really a strong component of what we've been doing recently with different leadership changes at the state level is coordinating regionally and with community partners to find ways to take advantage of opportunities and leverage the great resources in our community. Also, the staff will provide updates to the Intergovernmental Council and support all the components that make up this entire system. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the resources of this Coordinated Homeless Response Office really fulfill a need that we from our community have heard that is necessary to bring this work forward. And so providing that overarching leadership and structure and support for system level improvements. And then also very important, as we've identified, that this work is building sustainable resources, partnerships included in that, and additional funding beyond the local level to see what other resources can we tap into to better leverage the local implementation. Also, a central point of communication, very strong component of what the work that we've been doing and hoping to continue to formalize and streamline and find partnerships with communication, how we can amplify the messaging around this issue in our community and the great work of the champions in our community. And then also the community engagement with the H.O.P.E Advisory Board, and then other outreach events that we will be conducting to build awareness about this work in our community.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Awesome overview of the structure and the functions and how we're working together in a system and in our roles. I wanted to make sure to bring us back to the H.O.P.E policy recommendations because we've been working for the past couple of years really to implement your foundational recommendations and your 12 policy recommendations to have more of a coordinated homeless response system. And because we were already working on this, when the opportunity to opt into House Bill 4123 came up about a year ago, it was an easy choice to opt in and say, yes, we're already doing the work to build a better system and we need more funding to continue this work forward. So it's not as if we just started doing something new. It was more that all the work we're doing here at the local level based on the HOPE policy recommendations lined up really well with what the system, with what the state wanted to fund for a local level system. So let me move on to the next one. I have to give absolutely 100% of the credit to Rebecca for this beautiful community progress timeline. This was included in the materials that I sent to the HOPE board on Friday. So if this is too tiny to see, it will be in the materials after the meeting posted on the HOPE website. And for HOPE board members, you can pull up that email. But really wanting to track where we are now in relation to all the planning that's happened and a lot of the implementation work, because we aren't just starting a brand new pilot, we are continuing with work, and the state wants to fund it and continue to fund it. So I just always want to give deference and respect to the work that HOAC and our Healthy Communities team did to update the 10-year plan to end homelessness. We call that the update to the 10-year plan. A lot of work went into that. And the update to the 10-year plan really was the foundation for the community engagement efforts that the HOPE board did in 2019 and 2020. Those priority areas and the topic, it was how do we take our update to the 10-year plan and create policy recommendations based on the gaps in our system today. So for 18 months, a lot of you folks will remember in 2020 and 2021, a ton of community engagement. And I think this is very important for folks who have joined the HOPE board recently. Melissa Isavor, and I think you said at the last meeting, it was like, oh, well, I wish we'd been involved in, crafting some of this stuff that you're working on with the STRAT plan. The HOPE board members then were very involved because they created the policy recommendations. And so just wanting to make sure that that's really clear that there was a ton of community engagement on the HOPE policy recommendations before this board finalized them. And then the city and county accepted them unanimously and dove into implementation efforts. And that really started in that summer and fall 2021, where city and county and CSC staff started meeting very routinely and with service providers, the executive directors of all of our great organizations who are helping people. And in winter and spring, based on all of this great foundational work, the county hired a communications coordinator for our health department, and half of her time goes towards this, project manager, Rebecca, and a grant researcher and writer who has worked very closely with our service providers to support them in whatever way makes sense for their organization to implement HOPE recommendations. Whole past fall, we partnered with Rocket, and I've shared this with you a bunch, but it was really for coordinated entry system improvements. And we did that in as collaborative way as possible with our community partners who are going to be doing the work of coordinated entry and case conferencing. And now coming up here to winter 2023 and heading into spring 2023, we're doing a lot of public outreach. I realize I forgot to mention the House Bill 4123, which is why we're here tonight. It's on the bottom part of my thing. But this past fall, we really worked on how do we communicate to the state the great work that we are doing in the way that House Bill 4123 wants to fund, because it's all the same stuff, but it's how we communicate it. And so Rebecca and I and Peggy McGuire and Dina Eldridge from CSC and Commissioner Nancy Wise, we are doing quite a bit of countywide community engagement, and I'll touch upon that later. But I hope that this timeline is helpful because it really helps me understand everything that we've done. Okay. So how are we going from policy to progress? Just sort of nuts and bolts. What are we hoping to achieve with the HOPE board today? Why are you so valuable and helpful? The strategic plan, we call it the STRAT plan. I should stop saying STRAT plan and call it the strategic plan. It serves three main purposes. One of them is that it's a way to articulate, to communicate all the local work we're doing to the state within the framework that they're funding in this pilot, because we have all the same goals. We want to make sure that we convey it to the state so that they understand what we're working on is what they want to fund. And it's also what we were already working on anyway. The second goal, the strategic plan is going to guide our staff level work to implement policy recommendations. And that's more of the strategic part of what do we work on in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we aren't at that point yet. Tonight, we're really giving you the outline overview. And hopefully in May, we can come back with more of that strategic planning element. And then the third goal, really, of our strat plan is it's a community roadmap. And I love how you described that, Rebecca. It shows to our community the road that we're taking. You know, what directions are we following and where are we going? And so tonight, we'd love your feedback. Help us effectively communicate our local work to the state and to the variety of Benton County communities. So we will start and give you an overview. First, for folks who are not as familiar with the HOPE bylaws, there are values articulated in the HOPE bylaws that drove all of the policy work and that beautifully align with this pilot. But for people who are not as familiar with them, it's really about being data driven. How do we have better data driven work in our community? How do we take a system level approach and multi-sector approach instead of just one solution, because there isn't one solution for such a complex issue? Engaging and involving the whole community beyond just direct service providers. Prioritizing vulnerable populations. Promoting community safety for all, and promoting racial and ethnic justice. These were the values that drove the HOPE policy work. And they really beautifully align with this pilot that we're doing. And so I'll pass it over to you, Rebecca, to talk about the strategic plan requirements.
Thank you, Julie. One of the key things about House Bill 4123 is it was really focused on empowering the local communities to have that flexibility. And so really understanding how we can honor the work and communicate the work we're doing in our community within the confines of the requirements set out by House Bill 4123, but also knowing that respecting that the state also knows we have our systems here that we know about, and so it's kind of like a translation work we're working on here. So it's really nice to have this forum to talk this out. So House Bill 4123 identifies several pillars as far as what they want the community to focus on. And so one of them, sustainable funding for ongoing operations of coordinated homeless response system. So even House Bill 4123 provides that element in it. And now it's time to look at other ways to sustain this great work. Also increasing or streamlining resources and services to people at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So really, like Julie was saying, is, you know, not one particular solution can address the issue. We need to find ways to leverage the resources and bring people together to find solutions to very complex challenges in our community. Also incorporating national best practices for ending homelessness. So example recently is our work around coordinated entry. So how we communicate the work around that in the strategic plan and moving that process forward, and then also the research that the HOPE board has done over the years to identify those best practices that will then help us prioritize through the policy recommendations, local implementation projects. And then very important, eliminating racial disparities within the service area, which is a key priority identified in the HOPE values as well. Also creating pathways to permanent and supportive housing that is affordable to local populations experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So again, close alignment with the values and the policy recommendations that the HOPE board has prepared. And then in our work, as we kind of use the visual about the overarching system, one of the things that we did was, okay, well, how do we align the policy recommendations with the key pillars that are identified as focus areas by the state? And so we did a process of, you know, putting them into this matrix. Where do we have alignment? And we can see that some of the policy recommendations have multiple ways that they align with the state requirements. And so that, you know, as we understand that this is very small. This was a handout that's in the materials that Julie provided you all, but this was one way to communicate the alignment as we continue to draft the strategic plan. And you'll see that there's one that is green, which we will describe in another slide. So speaking of that, the cross-cutting recommendations, which were identified as the foundational recommendations by the H.O.P.E Advisory Board, and then that green row that was identified in the previous matrix, we acknowledge that these components have to be an ingredient in everything we are doing. So we know we need people to do the work. So the capacity, the skills, the training to do the work. We need the funding for the people, the training and the skills to get the work done. And legislative advocacy to make sure that the state understands our local needs and that we're able to communicate those needs and get the resources deployed locally. And then that green row that was identified in the previous matrix, communications, community engagement. There's so many ways that we could be communicating with stakeholders, partners, and our community members around this issue to gain ownership around it as an entire community. And so we understand that these are all things that we will try to articulate in the strategic plan as necessary to be successful. And actually, House Bill 4123 is essentially the embodiment of all these foundational recommendations, providing the capacity, the funding, and then the components within House Bill 4123 that enable legislative advocacy by 2 reports that we will be sending the state about what's working, lessons learned, areas where we think additional state support is needed. And then also there is a resource among the other pilot communities building sort of this political capital as far as having a united voice across the entire state about some of our needs. So next slide.
Okay. I think I am going to take over at this point, right, Rebecca? Okay. So the Coordinated Office Strategic Priorities, I'm going to stop presenting. Hopefully we haven't lost you all yet. I know there's a lot of information, but we want to take you through the whole narrative so that it makes sense. On Friday, I sent out to the H.O.P.E board a chart that looks like this. Rebecca, you seeing it okay? Yeah, I see you nodding. Okay. The Coordinated Office Strategic Priorities. So these are those requirements from the House Bill 4123 that Rebecca just went over with you. Sustainable funding, increasing resources. There's 5 of them. And what we are doing in our strategic plan to the state is communicating how the H.O.P.E policy recommendations and our work to implement them falls under each of these priorities that the state wants to fund. So we're going to go through 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 5 together with you. And I really want you to be vocal if it doesn't make sense. If you're like, Julie, how are you making the connection between data improvements and eliminating racial disparities? What's the logic leap there? Because it's not making sense. I really want you to speak up. And so we will go ahead and dive in. First priority that the state wants to fund and that we will be reporting back to them, sustainable funding for ongoing operations of coordinated homeless response system. So there are 3 policy recommendations, the work that we're doing on them that we think falls under this umbrella. Your 4th recommendation that we need to figure out how to increase the number of paid full-time case managers to support people transitioning out of homelessness. And really that's about the sustainable funding to pay people to do this great work. Policy recommendation number 11, it's one of the 3 pillars of permanent supported housing, and that's the available rental and income assistance options. And that's about sustainable funding for this ongoing operation of permanent supported housing. There has to be the rental assistance. And policy recommendation number 12, the supportive services, the 3rd pillar of permanent supported housing, on-site for residents at affordable housing locations. We need sustainable funding for that. And policy 4 and 12 are very similar. It's about how do we fund the people who are supporting folks transitioning out of homelessness and then supporting them in stable housing for the rest of their life or to whatever extent is needed. But these are the 3 that we really felt captured that sustainable funding for ongoing operations of the whole system. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Did that make sense? I see some head nods. Melissa.
I really appreciate the comprehensive overview. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. I know for some of these folks, they've seen me say this so many times, so I apologize for any redundancy, and I'm glad it's helpful for other folks. Anita, you were nodding your head as well, and then Cindy, any feedback on that? Is that making sense?
You bet, Julie. That's exactly what we were chatting about for a long, long time. There it is. And I think we've made great inroads, by the way. But yeah, you bet.
Yep. I think it's succinct. I think it's clear. And yeah, it's what's been talked about.
Okay, great. Rebecca and I are so in the weeds of implementation that trying to communicate it up at the high sort of policy priority level, my mind makes some logic jumps because I know the details and the nitty gritty. But that's not true, especially for folks at the state and these committees who might be new legislators reading the strategic plan and not really familiar with the topic of homelessness and solutions. So I appreciate that. Any other feedback on that one? Especially for folks who were not a part of the board when the recommendations were created.
Since this is the second time I've heard it, I think it's all good to me.
Bria, is that you?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Alice. Alice, you're muted if you're trying to share.
Unmute controls.
There you go. I can hear you now.
You can hear me. The more rent support, would that include more Section 8 vouchers?
That is a good example of a kind of sustainable rental assistance. A voucher is a very good example for that. And I have a good community progress update for you in the second half of the meeting about that one.
Okay.
Any other questions about that, Alice? Was it making sense to you how it was communicated?
Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay, well, I haven't seen any. Oh, Barbara, please jump in.
Thanks, Julie. So I think that this was wonderful. I really appreciate the overview. Well done. Do we have an estimate of the amount of money that is going to be needed for this to be sustainably funded?
Boy, howdy, Barbara. Put me on the spot. No, I don't think that I could give an estimate about the amount of resources necessary to sustainably fund all of the policy recommendations. That's really what we are working on in collaboration with Melissa Izavorin and Charissa and Stephanie. How do we sustainably fund certain portions of this system? Same with Lynn Benton Housing Authority and CSC. How do we sustainably fund vouchers and rental assistance? Same with Anita, right? How do we sustainably fund medical respite? I don't know that anyone in our community at least has done a comprehensive overview of the cost of sustaining a successful system that transitions and permanently houses folks experiencing homelessness. I don't have a good answer for that. Barbara, you want to take that on?
Well, I would be happy to take part in that. I've got 30 years experience in program management on stuff like that. And what I was going to say is if we go through that process, my experience is, you put forth a minimal plan of what the cost is to do the bare minimum. You put forth the ideal plan. Of course, that's what costs the most. And then the trade-off plan. And that's usually what gets funded is the middle plan. So I'm hoping if that hasn't been done already, I would be happy to take part in that.
Thank you for that offer, Barbara. Part of the strategic plan is to address how we are going to sustainably fund these different components. And some of it isn't yet fundable at the local level. And that's part of what the strategic plan communicates to the state of, we've been working collaboratively with IHN, Lynn Benton Housing Authority, Samaritan, CSC, the county, the city. We can fund these components sustainably. We simply cannot fund these other components sustainably at the local level, and that's where we need that state involvement or federal involvement. But it really shows them that we have exhausted every resource locally and really turned over every stone in a collaborative way. And here's what's remaining, because this would be a great system, and there are parts of it that we haven't figured out how to fund yet. So, Barbara, I will loop you in maybe on a smaller work group to talk about that.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to continue and we'll head to the next one. So the second key area, the priority area that the state is wanting to fund continued work at the local level is increasing or streamlining resources and services to people at risk of or experiencing homelessness. This is a pretty broad umbrella, and this encompasses so many different HOPE recommendations. How do we increase our resources or streamline them, make them more accessible? Your third recommendation, this is really about the situation table and convening, case conferencing, collaboration and coordination of providers and partners for improved care coordination. And then number 4, which was in the previous one too, we need more people who are paid to do this work and sustainably paid. Number 5, crisis response. That would be increasing a resource and a service to people who are at risk. The 6th recommendation about 24/7, 365 shelter, increasing resources to folks. Policy recommendation 7, the creation of a resource center, increasing resources. And number 10, development, more units so that we have more units for PSH. And then the other leg of permanent supported housing that needs to be increased are the supportive services and the stable funding to provide more of those services at affordable housing locations. I know that's a lot on one slide, so I'm going to leave it up here for a minute while folks ask questions.
Okay.
I hear someone. Alice, is that you?
That's me, and I have a question about policy 5,
Please.
the crisis response team, and I'm wondering if that is part of the new crisis center going up on 4th Street. We heard about that at the library Monday night, and I wondered if
Thank you for that question. Joel, do you want to talk about the crisis outreach response and engagement team? Because they are separate from the crisis center.
Right. And separate, but obviously going to utilize both together. We do have a crisis outreach response and engagement team, which pairs a mental health clinician with a police officer that specifically responds to mental health crisis. It is not confined to just our homeless community members. It's anybody in the community that could be experiencing mental health crisis. But when the crisis respite center is completed, that will undoubtedly be a resource for the core team, as well as any officer or deputy or any other community member that knows somebody that needs a place to be safe and to help work through their mental health concerns in an appropriate, supervised, safe environment, be it for a short term or a moderate term to gain some stability and move forward. But those will definitely be hand in hand, but they're also 2 separate programs.
Thank you for that, Joel. And the crisis outreach response and engagement team, the core team, the ball was rolling on that because that really is about staffing and collaboration between county behavioral health and law enforcement. And so the ball was already rolling as the HOPE board put together this recommendation, but they really wanted to codify it in a recommendation to say the HOPE board supports a crisis response team. And so that's been around for over a year now. And that is really separate from a crisis center, which is a physical location for folks to go when they are in mental health crisis. Did that answer your question, Alice?
Yes.
Great. Other feedback on this one, because pillar 2, it's a big one, increasing and streamlining resources for folks at risk or experiencing homelessness. It's broad, and that's why we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of your recommendations under it, because it is about increasing the whole system. Folks who did not write the original recommendations. I see Ari, Bria, Ricardo, Alice, Chanel, Cade. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I have one question. Because I'm often in meetings with the National Council on Homelessness. They have quite a few Zoom meetings. I'm wondering if we are going to connect with them in any way. And also, increasingly, I feel that we need a federal program to address the housing crisis, because clearly many states are overwhelmed. We are. And so I'm just thinking about where we need to push and who can push and how.
You're preaching to the choir, Alice. Yeah, the federal disinvestment in publicly subsidized housing dating back to the Reagan administration in the 80s when I was a child, just the steady decrease in publicly built and funded housing. I think that's something the federal level is grappling with right now, and HUD is grappling with. But and, you mentioned the National Association that you're connected with, and I think I'd like to follow up with you about what you are learning from them and where there is alignment in this work, and maybe even opportunities for funding. So thank you for bringing that up. Did you have anything more to add on that, Alice?
No, we're good.
Thanks. Charles, before I go to you, I saw Chanel share her video. Chanel, did you want to chime in?
Oh no, I was going to say I don't have any anything to remark on this one. But reading ahead, I think that I will have some.
Good. Yay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Write them down. I can't wait to hear them. Okay, Charles.
I just want to respond to what Alice was bringing up. It's something I've believed for a long time, is we can't do this alone. And I have been using my connections that I've made over the years with state legislators about, state funds and needs for support for our local communities. But I've also been having conversations with Congresswoman Val Hoyle about the need of federal assistance. And this is not just a Benton County problem or a Corvallis problem, but this is a national problem. But we are struggling, and we are doing everything we can with the tools we have to work with. But we need more ways to fund programs. So, yeah, not giving up.
Charles, thank you for mentioning that, because Val Hoyle did visit in last month, and city and county and staff, we all met with her and gave her information about what we're working on. And, it was a crunch session. We didn't have a lot of time, but it was, we need more affordable development investment from the feds. Army Corps of Engineers is holding up a lot of the development in Corvallis. Vouchers, we need more of them. And so she heard us loud and clear, and she has a real personal experience with housing insecurity. You could hear it when she talked with us, and I hope that she takes forward lots of the solutions we shared with her. Rebecca, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just wanting to sort of circle back to those foundational recommendations, how we really want to make sure that we're communicating throughout the strategic plan that, like the funding, the capacity, and the legislative advocacy. So, thinking about that as well, we might be showing these policy recommendations strictly in isolation today, knowing that in order to be successful in any one of those particular policy recommendations, we will elevate how we are doing those foundational policy recommendations in the actual 12 policies. I think that reiterates to us, Julie, like how we can communicate that in the ultimate strategic plan of how we acknowledge we're not going to do this alone, and how we're building that community roadmap about where those partnerships and connections can be made outside of the local level.
Spot on, teammate. I'm so glad you're here. I saw a question in the chat about Measure 110 funding impacting the community. Rebecca, we need to not forget to mention that because our office and our Healthy Communities team are playing a role to coordinate and support and continue to move forward really increased capacity for Measure 110 funding. I think Benton County got about $3.5 million across 5 different service providers for substance use disorder treatment, housing for people with substance use disorders, or just substance use. And employment, transportation, harm reduction. So I know 5 of our local providers, it has very positively impacted how they can help people, how many people they can help. And so that's the impact that I can share with you on that. But any other feedback from board members on this second pillar? I'll bring it up one last time. Okay. The third one, incorporate national best practices for ending homelessness. This is also a big umbrella. With policy recommendation number 1, facilitate and coordinate data improvement efforts with community partners. We are working in collaboration with many community partners, first and foremost CSC Community Services Consortium, on improving our coordinated entry process, case conferencing, referrals, the data itself. And so that one falls under here because coordinated entry and improved data is a national best practice. Working with providers to create metrics for successful program goals. This really needs to come after we have a bit better data locally. It's hard to create metrics when our data is fragmented in different systems. So policy recommendation is really a foundation for working on the second one. So we haven't gotten to number 2 yet, but it would be in that strategic plan for what we're working on the next 5 years, and it falls under a best practice, having metrics for successful program goals. Prioritizing collaboration and coordination for improved care coordination. This is the situation table policy recommendation, and it is a best practice. The data on the situation table is fantastic for helping safety issues and helping connect people to services. And also within the coordinated entry, the case conferencing. It achieves the goals of FUSE, frequent user systems engagement, to try to get folks housed who need permanent supported housing. And that's a national best practice. Case conferencing and convening partners for more human-centered referrals and care coordination. 24/7, 365 sheltering system. The best practice part of that is that it's 24/7, 365, it's low barrier, and that there is an option for all populations. Not that we could shelter every single person in every population, but that there is an option for a couple or someone who is trans and does not feel comfortable at the men's or women's shelter, that there is a single unit occupancy option and that it's open 24/7, 365. That's a best practice. Multiple best practices involved in that one. The creation of a resource center. This is the one-stop shop best practice, where if you have multiple providers in one location, it is more client-centered. It helps people connect with more services that they qualify for instead of having to go to 7 or 8 different locations around town or in different counties. And so that is also a best practice. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different policy recommendations. What do you think of that?
Have a question about the one-stop shop. We have in plans now a navigation center, CDDC, and is that the resource center? Do you see the navigation center that's planned as being that resource center?
Yes, thank you. And Rebecca, we should make that very, very clear. And we will. Yes, the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center's expansion to a navigation center and also having on-site sheltering is definitely the embodiment of that resource center. There's also one happening in South Benton County that I'll include in our progress update in the other half of the meeting. Thanks, Alice.
Another question. I would say Corvallis is way ahead in coordinating with providers and partners. I felt at that meeting Monday night when we got together for the Justice Center review that everybody there was, had worked together before the meeting. Everybody was on the same page, and included in each of those talks were providers who weren't represented but are underneath that board. So I see a lot of coordination, and I don't see that in every community. I think that is an amazing part of what we're doing here. Just a comment.
Thank you, Alice. Give us all the touchy-feely positivity we need. This is the tough topic, and I'll take your great feedback. Melissa.
Hi, thank you. I also recognize that navigation needs to be at the forefront, and so I appreciate that being brought up. I think, as a level set, and me being not one of those that was involved in all of this in the beginning. So we are essentially trying to align the strategic plan with the things that we already have in our strategic vision that was so thoroughly developed. And so all of those strategies that we have will roll under these policy areas. So on the surface, all of this really makes sense. But as we get into the strategies and as landscape has adjusted just a little bit since we went through that big process, however long ago, 2018, and around then, are we going to have an opportunity to provide some feedback in those intricate strategic things? We may need to add a thing or two or adjust something. So I didn't want to be closed down to that because we're trying to fit into our own bucket. Does that make sense? I just didn't know where the vision was for that, and where is our opportunity to provide more updated input.
That's great feedback, Melissa, and I think that's something our city, county, CSC team needs to chew on. Right now, we have been so knee-deep in implementing the 12 policy recommendations as they are, because it takes a long time to build a crisis center or to get PSH under development. But I think that's a good idea to have an opportunity to revisit and update. There might be new gaps, or there might be gaps that have now been filled. So I don't have a good answer for you. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for you yet, but that's a really good issue to bring up. And Rebecca, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things is, yes, it's a 5-year strategic plan, but we intend that the work plans or more of the operational components that come out of the strategic plan, that those will be reviewed on an annual basis. The other thing is we really want to make sure that this strategic plan does serve as that community roadmap and finds other strategic plans throughout the community where there's alignment. That's one of the things we're trying to find out is, okay, how are we supporting the work or mentioning that work so that people can kind of see the system that's mapped out within the coordinate or the strategic plan, because some of the work that we will be articulating in the strategic plan isn't something that the coordinate office has direct authority over, but it can say, these particular initiatives are happening in the community during this timeline. And so we know we need to support this other thing along that same path timeline.
So I appreciate you saying that. I think that helps me a lot. And one of the things I think about, because there are a lot of issues across the entire region that IHNCCO serves, and not just in housing, right? And sometimes I see that there are organizations in one county, but another county has a certain focus, and maybe we could build resources up in the other county for the work that's happening there that could then be done in that other county. And so I think there's some different regional dynamics that maybe we should incorporate at some point, or at least think about or consider more creatively. And so as Rebecca, you were saying, how do we align with other strategic plans and other pockets of the county? There may be some other efforts regionally that we could kind of leverage and support to help us in Benton County.
Yeah, you're spot on, Melissa. And that's really more getting into like implementation efforts, right? So a
Yeah,
lot of
sorry,
this
it's
is
where
up
my
at
brain keeps
no,
going.
you and me both. That's why I'm getting back up here at like the policies and the pillars and priority areas because Rebecca and I are in the implementation efforts, right? Um,
Mhm.
but yes, calling out the community health assessment and community health improvement regional work. I mean, there's going to be lots of honorable mentions of what IHN and Benton County Health Department are doing throughout the strategic plan because it's not our coordinated homeless response offices role to do everything, right? We're not all things for this system, but our role with the strategic plan is to communicate to the state what everybody is doing, right? IHN's killing it on this, and our community health team is doing this, and Samaritan is doing this, Corvallis Housing First is doing this, Unity is doing this. We help with convening and facilitating and coordinating and maybe bringing in some more sustainable funding. But part of our role is to communicate it to the state, to advocate for what we can't fund here locally, and also communicate to the rest of the community all the great work that people are doing in a unified way. But yeah, we'll
Yeah.
be talking with you on the nuts and bolts of how we incorporate IHN's goals into the actual writing of the strategic plan, and that's more that staff level coordination.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thanks for the feedback, Alice.
So that's where we would fit in, St. Olga's, and we're ready to go. We're going to be operational by summer, I think, and working with Allison Hopgood at the center. I really have a good picture of how things work in coordination with Good Sam and Anita Earl. And some people who cannot be hospitalized, they're the ones that the center wants to send to us. So I don't know whether I communicated this last time, but we have both Gregory Miller and Robin Baker at Benton County who have decided to give us 4 hours each every week of medical care and nursing care. So we're plus Robin's going to make a quilt for the first person who comes in, and they can take it away with them. She's awesome. So I just wanted to bring that good news up while we're talking about health. Okay.
Good news is always welcome, Alice. Yes, congrats to you. We're doing a community progress update later, but this is part of that community progress update. So share it now, share it later. I'm just glad you shared it. And I'm really glad that you're getting off the ground with the work you're doing. Have you thought about connecting with like the Corvallis Quilting Society? They made so many masks during COVID.
That's Robin's group. And
Okay,
so
never mind.
all set to make quilts till, we're as long as we're open and taking guests, they'll make a quilt for every guest.
I love it. Thank you, Alice. And Alice, I don't know if you can see the chat, but you're getting thanks for the update in the chat from other board members. Any other feedback on this? I'll go ahead and pull it back up again. National best practices. All right. We'll go ahead and move on to eliminating racial disparities within the service area. The crisis response team. The racial disparities that we see in folks experiencing a mental health crisis or experiencing chronic homelessness, especially for our Black community and Native American community members, it's stark and the overrepresentation is huge. So having a crisis response team for the first time in our community, it's going out to a population where there are extreme racial disparities and that really didn't have anyone who could respond to them in real time. The 24/7, 365 sheltering system for all populations. Again, in our folks experiencing homelessness, the racial disparities are extreme compared to people with rental assistance or vouchers or housing insecure. And so focusing on a sheltering system and also in collaboration with lots of community partners. Corvallis Housing First is doing a lot of that, and Casa Latinos Unidos is doing a lot of that. It's not necessarily in sheltering, but that collaboration is embedded within that one. The Resource Center. This as well, Allison Hobgood and all the folks at the Daytime Drop-In Center are doing a very thoughtful job of collaborating with specific partners for the growth to the Navigation Center so that we can target disparities in this population and also not just racial. And that's something we're going to communicate back to the state that while there are extreme racial disparities in folks experiencing homelessness, there's also an intersection with folks who have disabilities, physical and behavioral, and people in our LGBT community. So eliminating disparities beyond racial disparities is also a goal for many of our service providers. And then policy recommendation 8, exploring and investigating the needs, and the barriers to accessing housing for folks in our community whose past history has impacted their ability to secure housing. And that could be eviction, bankruptcy, felonies, a lot of different types of past history that are providing barriers. And then the racial history of Oregon has been a huge barrier to accessing housing for many folks. And we are working on improving our data, improving our vulnerability assessment to be able to explore and investigate this more. We have not gotten to this policy recommendation, but it will be in the strategic plan. Okay, so there are 4 there. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting. And I did not see whose hand went up first. Rebecca, did you?
I'm not sure if Alice's is still up from the last time, so I'd check in with her. It might be.
Okay, I know I saw Barbara's hand go up, and then we'll go over to Melissa.
Thank you, Julie. I really think we need to add policy number 1 here, where we need to continually track the data of who is homeless, who is needing resources. And that was the only comment I wanted to make.
Thank you. And you know what? Even in my description, I was talking about how our CSC folks and continuum of care folks are updating our vulnerability assessment because the VI SPDAT has proven to be just not as good of a tool as once envisioned when it comes to racial and ethnic disparities. And that is part of that policy number 1 of our data and coordinated entry improvements. So thank you, Barbara. Melissa.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in this space, and one of the things that I think we need to try to figure out how to navigate better is how do we address structural racism. So it's not about just the policies or the populations divided by race and ethnicity and what their experiences are. It's about the structural components around that, and then how inclusive are we in the things that we do in our social support systems that make people feel comfortable in disclosing like they're having troubles, being trusted. It's a hard thing, but it's a very real thing. So I think this might be one area where we might want to think about expanding a little bit, whether it be in the strategies or the work plans, as Rebecca was talking about.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I have an update about that too in a bit, but Andrea.
Melissa just said everything that I was going to say. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that maybe when, as a person who was involved in making the original recommendations, I feel like we didn't do, well, not maybe, I think we didn't do a good job of addressing this issue in our planning. We kind of perceive our community to not be as diverse as more urban areas, but I am continually shocked by how high the percentages are for the people that we serve that are multiracial, that are Native American, have a Native American heritage, how many more Black people in our community experience homelessness. So I feel like we could do a little bit, we could do a little bit more work on this area, and I would make a recommendation to the exec committee or CSC and y'all to maybe have that as a point of discussion for us in the future.
Thank you for that feedback, Andrea. I take that to heart. And also, our elected officials on the board, Nancy and Charles and Bria, communicating this feedback from your community engagement body back to city council and county commissioners that this is an area where your advisory body would like to engage more or provide more policy input. If you could communicate that back to your elected bodies and see if there's a desire there for that kind of input and how so. Okay. Melissa, thank you for putting a story from the LA Times in the chat about homeless priority housing list from LA. I would like to read it at a later time, but I wanted to make sure other folks see it. This week, just as an update, our team is finally meeting with our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Coordinator for Benton County. And she's new and she has experience at Oregon Housing and Community Services in addressing racial disparities in housing. So that's going to be our conversation. What can we do at the local level based on your experience at the state to work on this issue in a more tangible way? Okay. Other folks who wanted to chime in? Chanel, please.
I think just following up on what others have said, especially as it relates to addressing structural racism and especially historical oppression as it relates to like being a person of color living in Oregon. And knowing that as it relates to dismantling some of those structures and injustices that I think like Melissa, I think, alluded to, that the trust is a big factor. And when you think about being able to build that trust and also, again, addressing those injustices and also oppressions, like being able to have people not only familiar with historical um, um, structures and also, again, those oppressions, like being able to have an understanding and knowledge or framework of racism, um, and sexism and other isms. And so like, I guess what I'm getting to is like the representation of people of color being included in the crisis response team and included in the creation of and the facilitation of like this resource center. And I think like having knowledge is one thing, but also representation of people of color, knowing that like and creating and establishing that trust, I think is essential. Um, I mean, just some background on like my position. I'm one of the Black coordinators for mental health at Oregon State, and knowing that I think it's one thing to be able to be, a counselor and having understanding and wisdom and knowledge on some of the struggles or systemic barriers that kind of prevent students from thriving. But it's also one thing in being able to relate to some of those experiences and being able to understand um, what is needed in terms of like language or what is needed in terms of like specific support, I think is really crucial when you think about, again, dismantling some structures and systems that either cause harm or prevent some flourishing or thriving.
Chanel, can I make sure that I heard you right? Because you shared so much great information. Um, having representation of folks from communities of color and people who have lived experience be not just giving feedback, but the ones creating new things at the table.
Yes, yes. And so like Melissa put in the chat, like peer supports would be like a great way to kind of address that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Allison Hobgood at the Drop-In Center is doing a fantastic and intentional job of that in the creation of this navigation center. Would you be interested in connecting with her to give her any more insight or feedback on that or to learn what she's doing in that way?
Yeah, to learn. I wouldn't want to say give feedback, but yeah, to learn would be great.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. Ricardo.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Just to add that we had a meeting with Allison a few months ago, and we started a conversation precisely to address the need of incorporating a culturally appropriate strategy or some ways in which our organization that works with the Latinx community can support her work. So one of the things that we discussed is to start collecting data on our site of people who have experienced homelessness in a given period of time. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think she said that data on Latinx is not very good. So we can collect those data. Now, our work as an organization is really very much focused on keeping people housed, right? And that is our big effort. So we are working affordable housing development in Lebanon with 2 community health workers who are housed there, who are placed there. And that is a housing development from the Farm Worker Housing Development Corporation. But we also signed an MOU with a nonprofit that is going to develop a housing development in Southtown, Evergreen, I think it's called. So if that is approved, we hope to be able to have a community health worker there. So we are working in terms of keeping people housed, but also we hope to be able to work closer with Allison as well.
That's fantastic news, Ricardo. Thank you for sharing. I like these community progress updates interspersed into the boring strategic plan stuff
So
to keep us awake and impassioned of the real work. Thank you. Okay, any other feedback from Hope Advisory Board members?
Yes, I have some feedback relating to the issue that was just addressed by Chanel, and that is that in the medical facilities that we have, that is a place where people of color and people who are Indigenous run into real hardline racism. And I think that we need to address that with Good Samaritan and other medical facilities, because it's very hurtful. I mean, and it's not just limited to Corvallis, it's countywide. So I don't know how we do that, but I am very invested in seeing people really begin to understand how hurtful their reactions can be to people of color and people Indigenous and immigrants who don't speak our language. There's a whole range of, and LGBT, all of them. So.
Thank you, Alice. I'm not sure exactly where that conversation fits into what we're talking about tonight, but I do think that it's something more at the staff level coordination that I'd love to pull you in and talk about how best to move forward tangible solutions on that, whether it's training. Yeah, I will connect with you about that another time if that's okay with you.
Thank you. And a crisis response team is a very good place to start with this, I think.
And I heard Chanel's feedback too, that having folks on the core team who are from communities of color is really what will go a long way for that as well. So I think both are needed. Okay, going to move on. This is the 4th one. Any other feedback on this 4th pillar before I move to the 5th one from Hope board members? All right, the 5th and final one, creating pathways to permanent and supportive housing that is affordable to local populations experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Oh, I put policy number 3 twice. Apologies. The pathways to permanent housing is coming from that collaboration and coordination of providers and partners at case conferencing to look at folks on the coordinated entry list. Folks at the top of that list are the ones who really do qualify for permanent supported housing. And this case conferencing is helping to create better pathways amongst our service providers. The 7th one, the resource center. Having a bunch of different service providers in one location to coordinate in real time between harm reduction and housing and health and shelter is creating those pathways for folks who are experiencing homelessness and having the pathway be really warm handoffs. Policy 8, this is that exploring and investigating the need and the barriers. That's about which pathways have barriers for people with sex offenses or criminal convictions, eviction history, bankruptcy in their record. And we haven't gotten to that yet because our data really needs to be improved before we can explore that in a better way, but still want to include it under here. And then policies 10, 11, and 12 are the three stool pillar, the three legs of the stool for permanent supported housing. The units, number 10, that's increased development. Policy 11, the available rental and income assistance options, and 12, the supportive services, and having the pathways to that PSH and having it be affordable and to keep folks at risk of experiencing homelessness remaining in stable housing. That's permanent supported housing. So that's why we included all 3 of those. So there's 6 there under this 5th pillar. And I will go ahead and stop presenting. Melissa, I think I saw your hand first.
Yeah, me again. Sorry. I am just wondering, with the permanent and supportive housing, we're doing all the work and exploring the barriers, amazing work and trying to explore and do and developing housing. But one of the things that has come up for me, and an example was posed to me in Washington, and I don't know that it's happening here, but I'd love to get your input. And maybe we should consider is how do we work with business and industry to look at the cost of housing? Because what's happening in Washington, a lot of times folks will get vouchers and they'll be just priced out of that voucher. So the vouchers, $2,490. They're like, it's $2,500. You're axed out, right? So, some of those things need to be built in our strategies and work plans. And I don't know that they are already, but if we could, really facilitate or advocate or push on business and industry anymore, that would be good.
Thank you. I'd like to hear your ideas about that at a implementation kind of meeting.
We're gonna pick it and show up at people's homes.
And Melissa, do you have Alice's email to start any conversation about the healthcare setting feedback? And if not, I can connect you to. I think I just lost Melissa. I'm going to go ahead and send that email to connect them about the healthcare setting.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I can look on emails and whatever right now. If I find it, I'll put it in the chat that I found it. Okay.
Thank you. Other board members, Alice, I still see your hand up, but I think it might be from the previous comment. And for folks not on the Hope board, I put my email in the chat. Please email me because this is a working meeting. So the public comment period is really for folks not on the Hope board. Other Hope board members, feedback, comments, what did we miss? Does anything not make sense as to falling under creating pathways to permanent and supportive housing that's affordable? And for folks who are new in this past year to the Hope Board, How about this one? I'm thinking Kate and Ari, Ricardo, Chanel. Any other feedback you have on this?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. Well, that was super helpful. I knew it was going to take some time. I'm glad that we didn't pack this agenda. You guys give such great feedback. Yeah, really the overarching goal. Does this make sense? Will it be understandable to a broad range of community members? And if something occurs to you later on, please email me. And we are going to come back in May with a more fleshed out strategic plan. So there'll be more opportunities for engagement and feedback on this. So I'm going to pivot. Oh, Cindy, please go ahead. I'll stop presenting.
The only thing that I might recommend if you really want just somebody off the street who hasn't seen this before is maybe to include a glossary that gives a few definitions of what is a resource center, what is a navigation center, and just so there's some so they can refer to that and
That is
not
great feedback.
just be confused about things that we've seen many, many, many times, and they might be seeing for the very first time.
Thank you for
I
that.
think that might go in line with the communications piece. I just put a comment in the chat.
Yes. What do you mean, Melissa, with were we going to talk about comms?
There was one component that we needed to include in the strategic plan, and it was in relation to communications, and it didn't align with any of our current policies.
It's more that communications, improved communications, more access to information and ways to plug in. That was Hope Policy Recommendation number 9. And we didn't include it under all of these pillars because the work that we're doing as a coordinated office is serving that role of communications. So I mean, it would be across all of them, right? I mean, we need the capacity, the funding, and we need to communicate it all out. So that's why we kind of pulled it out of that matrix to say we're not going to check every box on all the pillars because communicating it is the strategic plan.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more on that?
No,
Melissa?
and I do have Alice's email. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Damien. Okay, I will go ahead and give a great progress update. I'm really thrilled to share some of what's going on. So I'm going to be touching on new projects in Benton County that implement these HOPE policy recommendations, and they will also be examples that we share in the strategic plan of, what does it mean to work on a resource center? Well, here's what's happening. And then where applicable, I'm going to describe the role of the coordinated office staff. So how myself, Rebecca, Kaylee, and Libby support or coordinate community partners. And just making it real clear for our elected officials or anybody else tuning in, community updates like this will happen regularly at HOPE meetings. We're not going to be going back to city council meetings to give these kind of updates. This is the community engagement forum at the HOPE board. So coordinated entry, CSC is doing a fantastic job. This is how do we prioritize our most vulnerable folks for housing with data-informed decisions. And now we've added in this human-centered case conferencing that Dina from CSC is convening. And then our role, Rebecca and mine, is really how do we support that system improvement? How do we address releases of information that are going to work for this group? How do we document what they're doing to have a policy and procedures manual? And so this coordinated entry, it's HOPE recommendation 1, 2, and 3. The data improvement that we need to be able to create better success metrics. And then also that collaborating, coordinating, case conferencing for coordinated entry is one component of that, in addition to that situation table part of the recommendation. The crisis response and services, your HOPE recommendation number 5. Captain Goodwin already went over the core team, so I don't think I need to go over that anymore. And then the crisis center site in downtown, they've broken ground, and I sent all of you board members a 1-pager about the crisis center with more information about it. You can share with your networks. That was in the email on Friday. The 24/7 sheltering. all of the credit goes to our community partners, people who are providing services, Unity Shelter, Corvallis Housing First, Community Outreach, Jackson Street Youth, Cardva, and then the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center pivoting to become a navigation center that will have sheltering on site. The capacity across the board has added so many units of sheltering and transitional housing and upcoming permanent supported housing with Corvallis Housing First. But I also wanted to give an example of what our coordinated office is doing. Rebecca and I worked on a county code change to allow more flexibility in unincorporated county areas. And some folks in Corvallis have not heard about this yet because we've really been sharing it in our rural outreach. But the state passed a law allowing for more flexibility and saying a county or a city could adopt rules for overnight camping. Benton County commissioners chose to adopt a code to allow up to 3 vehicles on religious property in unincorporated areas. So that's outside the city limits of Corvallis, Adair, Monroe, and Philomath. And a vehicle is a car, RV trailer, or a movable microshelter. And I'm thinking most folks in Corvallis already know what a microshelter is, but just in case, this is what a microshelter looks like. And we have it one church in unincorporated Benton County that's hosting microshelters under this new county code. And they're being supported by Unity Shelter, a Corvallis-based service provider. So thanks to Unity, this site has made it off the ground. I wanted to share that. Another example, the South Benton Food Pantry. Janice Cook is a rock star, and all the volunteers that she coordinates in Monroe, they are pivoting from being just a food pantry to a resource center called the H.O.P.E Resource Center. And she came, I think it was in August or September, to present to you all about the work that she's doing. And our role as a coordinated office, especially with our new contracted grant writer, connecting her with other providers and funding sources and resources. We connected her with United Way so that Chris Sherrod can convene partners the way he did for the Daytime Drop-In Center's Navigation Center concept to talk about how do we work together, how do we leverage resources. And then also our role, Rebecca and mine, is that awareness and education, sharing it here, sharing it when we talk in Adair and Philomath, and that supporting additional funding is really key for our grant writer. The same is true for the Navigation Center here in Corvallis. Credit goes to Allison and Alita and all the folks who support the drop-in center and volunteer there. This is a one-pager that I sent out to you all on Friday as well that gives you a real good breakdown of what is planned there and some contact information to get more information on the Navigation Center, also known as a resource center with on-site sheltering. So that's this HOPE Recommendation 6 implementation and Recommendation 7 of a resource center. You've got the Navigation Center here in Corvallis and the H.O.P.E Resource Center in Monroe, and a little about our role in that. Your recommendation number 9, and Melissa, here is communications in action. Rebecca and I are really focusing on county-wide communication and outreach for education, collaboration, and these system improvements. So in the past month and in the upcoming 2 months, we have already been to Monroe and Adair. We have Philomath on calendar for April. I'm scheduling Albany right now. And I wanted to make sure to mention our community health assessment called the CHA and the community health improvement plan, the CHIP. They are going to be doing outreach events in Monroe and Alsea. And I'll stop presenting for a second. This is really where the efforts of IHN, our regional partners, the rest of our health department, we are tapping into those efforts. So instead of me and Rebecca scheduling a separate event in Monroe and doing our own thing, we're coordinating with Sarah Hartstein and folks at IHN to attend their outreach events because one of their priority areas for community health improvement is housing. So we're going to listen in, we'll help facilitate, we'll hand out flyers at the door, and that way we're not oversaturating our community partners. And also we're really leveraging this effort so that it's more coordinated. So Melissa, I wanted to make sure that you heard that too, so that you know these CHA and CHIP efforts are working hand in hand with what Rebecca and I are doing.
I love that and truly appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Andrea, did you want to chime in? I saw that you unmuted. Okay, just making sure. Back to a couple more progress updates. Recommendation number 11. I am thrilled, and I can take absolutely no credit for any of this. I am just sharing it with you. The available rental and income assistance options. CSC, Community Services Consortium, Melissa Egan, she's a rock star. She has worked with our housing authority, Lynn Benton Housing Authority, on our new emergency housing vouchers that came out during COVID. They are limited. There was only about 170 of them. I'll talk about that first. And then the other coordination on rental and income assistance is with IHNCCO, where Melissa works. There's a new Medicaid waiver benefit for rental assistance. And Rebecca and I are participating in the Coalition for Housing Equity that IHN is convening to talk about what does this waiver benefit look like? How do we deploy it? What should be included in it? And folks like Andrea and other service providers are part of that coalition to shape what this benefit looks like. But let me tell you about the emergency housing vouchers. So LBHA, Lynn Benton Housing Authority, and CSC, they cooperated together to target folks who were literally experiencing homelessness or people fleeing domestic violence. The difference with these EHVs, emergency vouchers that came out during COVID, they came with two things the regular vouchers in our Section 8 Housing Choice Program do not come with. Funding for a housing navigator to help people find and secure housing for each of the EHV recipients, and $3,000 per voucher. Just flexible funds. I mean, it's what every provider says they need. It's for deposit, moving costs, landlord incentives, first and last month's rent. $3,000 for each voucher. And so I was lucky enough to get to see Donna Holt present this information to our county commissioners about a month or two ago. The difference in success rate. Our typical housing choice voucher program, anywhere between 37 to 54% in Benton County. The emergency housing voucher, 63.5% success rate. Again, this data is not fully up to date. There are still vouchers that haven't completed their cycles, so these might fluctuate. But currently, people with a regular voucher, it's about 31% leased in Benton County, double that for the emergency housing vouchers that came with a housing navigator, and $3,000, about 60% leased up in Benton County. And that credit goes to Lynn Benton Housing Authority and CSC, but I wanted to share it here because this is the implementation of one of your recommendations, and I'm thrilled to share good news. Your recommendation 4 and 12, this is really, we need more paid people to do great work of helping folks out of homelessness and staying stably housed. That's the collaboration with IHN CCO on this new Medicaid waiver benefit for housing navigation. The substance use disorder 1115 one, they call it community reintegration, and then that rental assistance component. And then our grant writer. Our grant writer is supporting organizations applying for funding and also coordinating with IHN to talk about sustainable funding streams. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing and see if there's any questions about the progress update or other things to add. There are a ton of service providers on this call. Andrea, Anita, Chanel, Ricardo, Alice. What's going on? Add to the progress update. Go for it.
Don't forget about the inclement weather shelter. That was a huge win. Like, I'm just so proud of the work that Faith, Hope, and Charity did with Tara and Chris. And yes, it's probably not the solution forever because it relies on hoteling. And I know that a lot of people put in some volunteer time towards that, but getting the meadows cleared out for an entire evening through that program was amazing. Amazing. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those guys for all that work.
Thank you for reminding me of that. We had wanted to do a motel sheltering update, but they are still looking at the data from the last activation. So I would like to, at your May meeting or upcoming this summer, really present about that program. For folks who don't know about it, a service provider who is new to sheltering, but not new to helping people, called Faith, Hope, and Charity. They really stepped in and said, we will take this on. And by this, it's motel sheltering on the worst of nights, the coldest of the cold or snowy, and also the hottest of the hot or really smoky weather. So we're just calling it severe weather motel sheltering because it's not just for the cold nights, it's for those severe weather events. And Faith, Hope, and Charity, the county contracted with them for 2 different rounds of funding to be able to activate and get folks who are experiencing homelessness and not in shelter into motel rooms very quickly. And preliminarily, the first activation helped over 60 people. They helped families with kids in cars. They helped a dad who could get a job. They got pregnant women into substance use disorder treatment. I was like almost crying at the presentation at the commissioners meeting because it was uplifting and also heart-wrenching that folks are experiencing this. So thank you for remembering that, Andrea, and I'll come back with more information about that as it happens. Other updates from Corvallis Housing First, or Anita, do you have one?
Sure, I could give a broad strokes update. As I was looking at the implementation plan, I was thinking about I guess 3 years on the HOPE committee, right? It feels like 3-ish for me. But since my joining the HOPE committee, Samaritan's efforts have been a millionfold. I really haven't given it much thought because it's all happened so organically, but it was just me. And now it's 4 people. It was 2 respite beds. It's 15 in a 3-county region with more to come. There was no data. Now we have inventories in our EPIC, our healthcare system, that collects data all the time on who the unhoused are and clicks automatic referrals over to my team. That was not a thing. That was not even a consideration 4 years ago. And the voice of the unhoused has increased through storytelling and caring and education and GME with the new residents and the doctor teams. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know about us now in the healthcare system. And I know everyone else so well. I'm called by everyone all the time. So the utility is really gorgeous and I feel really proud. So yes, Samaritan, we are here. We're on board.
Thank you, Anita. You're getting thanks in the chat as well. Yes, heart right back to you. Any other service providers or community members with an update about services, housing, collaboration, anything else? What did I forget?
I think it's worth mentioning that the community recognized the Unity Shelter at Celebrate Corvallis, the big chamber event. I think that was a fantastic thing because I bet there are a lot of people who were in that room that night who don't even know what Unity Shelter is.
You are right about that. I wish I could have gone. My entire family was sick. Andrea, you were able to go, weren't you? Or no? No. Yeah, I'm so glad they were there to accept that. Okay. If there aren't any other community progress updates, Catherine, are you still here? I think Catherine had to leave for a planning commission meeting unless, yeah, she did. Okay. She prepared me ahead of time. Catherine and the HOPE Executive Committee really wanted to make sure that this group of active folks, advocates, people who want change, really understood how to make your voice heard and know what's going on at the state legislature because there's a lot going on. There are so many bills on housing right now. And so I'm going to email these links to you after the meeting. But a lot of credit goes to Catherine Biscoe, one of your HOPE co-chairs, for putting this together. But if you want to know about current bills involving housing, the Oregon Housing Alliance Alliance. Benton County is a member, thanks to our county commissioners. They have a 2023 legislative agenda. So I'll email you this after the meeting, but this is also for anybody else who's tuning in. Click on that and it will take you to a pretty short and comprehensive list of the bills that are really important for housing. And then how to track bills and get updates. Oregon Housing Alliance also has a really great how-to on walking you through on the Oregon Legislative website. Here's what you click on. Here's how you subscribe. And they also do a fantastic walkthrough of giving testimony. So thank you to the Oregon Housing Alliance. And I'm glad that the county is members, so we have access to their agendas and being able to vote on what they support. And so on the testimony one, it tells you how you can give testimony and submit testimony via email. I wanted to highlight that. And then lastly, the central point of communications. If you want to be in the know, sign up for updates or hear about the storytelling. I think the storytelling component is one that I know our communications coordinator is very proud to finally have realized, and it's due to partnerships with Corvallis Housing First and COI and Unity Shelter, sharing success stories of people who have really struggled and gotten help and support in our community from our community partners and are now stably housed, hopefully permanently. So it's also going out in our Hope news and updates. So you can subscribe to get those. And then following on social media, you will be able to see upcoming events, hear about partner events. So I'm really proud of all the work Kaylee's done. So next steps, your upcoming May meeting, and again, the reason that we are coming back to you in 2 months instead of next month is to give us time to incorporate your feedback and to write the content of the strategic plan and get it to you in time so that you can review it, digest it, and come to the May meeting with feedback for us. And I'm really thrilled to finally say that your May meeting will be hybrid, in person and virtual at our County Kalapuya building. And I'll share more details about that when they come. So I will stop presenting. I know many of you Hope Board members have been chomping at the bit to be in person, and I'm sorry we couldn't get it for this meeting. Our really fantastic virtual room was booked for today, but from May onward, the fourth Wednesday of the month, we have it for the Hope Board meetings, and it's the same room that our commissioners meet in with the OWL technology. What was very important to your Hope Executive Committee was that people attending virtually had no difference in experience than the folks in the room. And I think with the technology they have in that room, we've had virtual presenters all the time. And so I'll be reaching out to you probably in the first week of May to ask you, are you planning to attend in person or virtually, just to make sure we have the room set up. And obviously, you know, people get sick and things come up, but just so we can get an estimation of how many people want to be there in person. Andrea, your hand's still up. Do you want to chime in?
Nope, sorry about that.
That's okay. Any other questions, feedback, comments, ideas? Okay. Well, I'm excited to hear some people in the chat already saying they will be there in person. I know my team is thrilled to be there in person. And we are so on time today that we get to end early. Yay! Thank you, Peggy, for all your hard work at the state as well. Peggy Lynch, that is. Okay, folks, if there isn't anything else from board members, is there anything our executive committee members would like to chime in on before the meeting closes? You good, Charles?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and end your March meeting. Thank you for the feedback, and we will come back and follow up with you in May. Yeah. Damien, did you want to ask me something, or are you just high-fiving me with that hand?
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Paula, are you good on what you need for the notes? Do you need anything in the chat? I can leave it open a little bit longer.
Julie, the county had a rollout, of the new Microsoft Teams. So I believe now I have H.O.P.E, it pops up the chats and the recordings. So I'm in the loop now. So I don't think you have to
Great.
send me anything now. I think I'm just
Great.
automatically in the loop. The one question I have, though, when we meet in May, is with the hybrid meeting is how we're going to record it. Because sometimes when you record it with Microsoft Teams, I'm not sure, does it also record what people say? I mean, does it pick